Somewhat inspired by Lawrence's talk a fortnight ago. He was very, very short talk if you were here. He's in, said what he had to say and got off. And I thought, yep, it's a good model. So I'm going to try and emulate him. I just have a very, I think, simple thought tonight. Who has ever, who's had like what they would describe as like an arch nemesis or a foe, even when you were a kid? Surprise, surprise, my daughter is one of the only hands that goes up. No, there's a few. Did it brew for a long time? Like years maybe, months, years of like resentment and enmity and whatever? While maybe like not all of us identify with the idea of having an arch enemy, you probably all like experienced like some sort of conflict with people, and maybe like a resentment that's held for a while, like a falling out that occurs, and sort of hard to patch up a relationship. And there's no more sort of fundamental element of Christianity than the element or the principle of forgiving each other. So I thought I'd just look at some thoughts on that tonight. We might start in first. No, we won't. We'll start in Matthew chapter 18. I think this is one of those things that seems really simple when you first consider it, but there's layers to it, and like the older I get, the more I realise what a way I've got to go on this, I think. So hopefully something for everyone. Matthew 18, there's a parable here in verse 21. Or have I got the wrong thing already? No, that's right. Yep. Okay, verse 21. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Basically, how many times should I forgive someone who's offended me? And he then gives what he thinks is a pretty generous answer. He goes like 7 times, thinking there's a bit of, showing some generosity there. And Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. And then we go on and we talk, for time I won't read it all in detail, but we read about a king who wanted to sort of reclaim some of his debts. He found someone who owed him like quite a big amount of money, and he went to him and said, you need to pay me. And the guy said, I haven't got it. Can you give me some time? Now this is where I risk getting it wrong because I am just glossing over things, but basically the sort of the king in that story, he forgave the debt. But this fellow, he sort of failed to recognise the mercy that he had just been given, and he went out and there was another person who owed him some money. It was a much smaller sum, but he demanded it be repaid. The guy said to him, sorry mate, I don't have the cash. Can you, I'm paraphrasing clearly, he said, can you give me a minute, and he said, no, into the dungeons with you, and basically you'll come out when I get my money. And long story short, the sort of the guy at the end of this story, his friends heard about it. They went to the guy at the start of the story, the king, and said, you know what's happened here? This guy's basically put this guy in prison. And long story short, the king sort of sees the inequity in that, and he punishes the guy who couldn't sort of take the role model of mercy and actually the personal experience of mercy that he was given, and he couldn't apply that in his own life. He found instead like scope to penalise and resent and hang on to. He could not forgive someone else that was sort of below him in a way. Go to Colossians, if you will, for actually a far more succinct explanation of that whole story. Colossians 3 and verse 13, where it just says in one verse, Colossians 3:13, forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, Even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And in another translation, a more modern one, that same verse says this: be gentle and ready to forgive. Never hold grudges. Remember, this is the key bit. This is the bit that enables you to not hold a grudge. The Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. So there's the kind of really simple, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, you've got to forgive everyone. But of course, with so many of these biblical principles, it sounds good in the kind of, in the cool of the day. It's about how well we kind of apply it in the heat of the battle, isn't it? When you're actually full of turmoil and full of maybe resentment and you're angry and whatever, can we retain these concepts and try and apply them? I think there is so much, like this like the size of the fellowship that we are in. Like the brother gave his testimony, Riley said that said he grew up in a small fellowship, and then he caught himself because he knows it's relative, and he said a relatively small fellowship, because of course, relative to, yes, somewhere like here, that is small, but we are a massive group of Christians in the same group relative to so many other of our like Revival fellowships around the world. That obviously is awesome, and we have like this depth of like the extracurricular activities that we're all involved with as part of the fellowship, from plays to youngies to outreaches to whatever. It's great, but boy, have we also got opportunity to spark off each other as we try and work together to do all these things, and find ourselves like at odds with each other and fighting over things, and realising that, this person I have to work with on this, I actually find really annoying. They're not very good at what they're trying to do. I think they're arrogant. I don't enjoy being part of their team. Like you've got so many opportunities to get upset at each other in this huge work. Whereas some smaller places, perhaps you don't have that luxury and that maybe that necessity of really actually having to apply some of this in a practical way. I wanted to go to the prodigal son story, and I have taken some notes, and not enough. Who can tell me where the prodigal son story is? 10 points for anyone. Luke 15, let's go there. Thanks, Pastor Paul. I feel like I was thinking about this afternoon the children of Israel. You know, they were a massive group, living together, all in each other's grill and all the time. And they must have had some spectacular falling outs amongst them. And you can, even like when, you know, they were following around the cloud of fire or the pillar of smoke, like initially, that would have been like all they focused on. Like, wow, like God is in our midst leading us. But I reckon after a while, the novelty would have worn off, and they probably would have fallen back into the day-to-day, like, oh, can you believe Barry just did this to me, and Sandra over there said this about my kids, and whatever. Like, they kind of would have faded in a way. And like, but yeah, you can imagine when amazing things happened to them, like when they were walking through the Red Sea, and that parted, and you can imagine that like they would not have had the time to focus on the petty fallings out that they might be having as individuals. It would have just been like, wow, look at the bigger picture, look where we're going. And maybe sometimes the same is true for us. Like, we see some amazing things, and we know deep down the big picture, like what we're doing here, who we're serving, but we kind of, sometimes the eye is lower, and we get into the day-to-day, and we get annoyed with each other, and sometimes it's just good to look up again, like where's the fire, where's the walls of ocean on either side of me. I think that helps sometimes keep it in perspective. But anyway, Luke and chapter 15. Pastor Paul didn't give me the verse, unfortunately, but we will start. Actually, I'm not even, again, for time, I'm not going to read the story. I reckon everyone here probably knows it pretty well. If you don't, the short version is, one dad has got two sons. One of those sons, the younger son, decides he's sick of living at home and he wants to go out and be his own man and do his own thing. So he takes his inheritance, what's owed to him, and he heads out to live his life, have a grand old time. Unfortunately, he runs out of cash pretty quickly. Turns out things aren't as sort of glossy as they first seemed. He's soon eating with the pigs and sleeping along the side of the road and that sort of thing, and he realises, what's the point? I would be better off being a servant in my dad's house than I am here. I'll go home, I'll beg forgiveness, and I'll just be a servant back there. So the younger brother is the obvious, like, what happens to the younger brother, i.e. he's forgiven by his dad. That's the obvious narrative, and that's the one we always focus on, because it's so clear that that's the gospel of redemption just playing out in action there. It's an easy story to like for us because it kind of reminds us that however far we go wrong, however silly we are, we can always repent and we can come back to the Father and have forgiveness with God. But there's a sort of the lesser fixated or the lesser focused story is that of the older brother. And I think that's interesting. It's less fun to talk about in a way because usually we can, if we admit it, we can identify with the older brother as well, but that's a less comfortable position to be in when you sort of see yourself in the older brother's shoes. And maybe it doesn't sit as easy with us to sort of dwell on that. But there are two sons in the story that in different ways need direction from the father. One's kind of good and one's bad, but actually we find them both not having quite the right attitude at different times. So I should read the passage that's probably most relevant here. We'll pick it up in verse 21. This is the son returning home. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight. I am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servant, Bring forth the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this is my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. That's the bit of the story we all love, because we can all see ourselves coming in like the younger brother and being immediately forgiven by God. But sometimes we don't have to forgive people because of what they do directly to us. Sometimes it's just their general, what we would consider to be their badness, or their failures, or the fact that we can't kind of understand why God would forgive them for what we think they've done wrong. And that's the bit that's somehow what we've got to forgive. That's the bit we've got to get past, because that's what happened to the older son here. He wasn't as delighted by the situation as dad was. He says he was in the field as he came back. He saw the music and the dancing, and he sort of said to the servants, What's going on? They said unto him, Thy brother is come. Thy father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And you can kind of, I guess, wonder about the motivations. Like, why was he angry about this? I think if I just put in my own sort of natural kind of feelings into the situation, I'd probably feel like, well, I've kind of done my time. I've been the good kind of kid here. I've served who I was supposed to serve. And it kind of irks me that this guy's kind of got out of what I have had to do, and like God, or my father has forgiven him. He's got away with so much, and he wasn't happy about it. And I think his father recognised where he was at, but it says he entreated him, and he said, this is the son still talking. He says, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, yet you never gave me a kid that I make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which had devoured thy living with harlots, that has killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead, and is alive again, and was lost, and is found. And so I guess it calls us to, if we sort of put ourselves in the shoes of the older brother and we think, is that ever an attitude we have in our mind about our brothers and sisters? You might see people come into the fellowship with a history that you know are aware, and that might not sit well with you for whatever reason. You might have a brother or sister that you've known for many years in the fellowship, and you know for whatever reason that they have done something sinful, wrong, silly, and they've sort of found redemption or come back and it just doesn't sit well with you, for whatever reason, we can feel a bit entitled, I think, because we would sort of say, well, I have never done that, and so I don't kind of get why they should be forgiven. But they need to be welcomed back into the fold. People, our brothers and sisters, need to be welcomed back by us in the same way our dad is basically in this story, saying without hesitation or any conflict, welcome back, come in. There's nothing wrong. So hopefully you can kind of see something in that for you. I don't think it applies to all of us all the time, but just something I was thinking about. And one other example, or one other aspect, I guess, to this, the last thing I'll kind of talk about is in 1 Corinthians. Do you have the verse for that one? 1 Corinthians 3. I think the key is when it comes to forgiveness and you're trying to find it in yourself is to admit your own failures. Just acknowledge them. Acknowledge your own need for forgiveness on a regular basis from God. First Corinthians and chapter 3, verse 1. So this is like a sort of a bit of a stern letter written to the Corinthian church. So you can imagine yourselves or them as just like us, normal, run-of-the-mill Christians with the same failures and aspirations and issues and all that as we have today. And he says, "And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as unto babes in Christ. I have fed you with milk and not with meat, for hitherto you were not able to bear it, neither yet are you now able." In verse 3, I do want to read it out of this other translation again, but you follow along in the King James, but it says here, "For you are still only baby Christians," which is a nice way to think about what it means to be drinking the milk and not able to eat the meat. Controlled by your own desires and not God's. Because I think a lot of the time when I had sort of thought about this kind of almost a telling off that Paul's giving them that they couldn't devour meat, only milk, it was sort of like I thought, oh yeah, he's sort of saying, you guys can't really get into the meaty theological things. You don't understand the complicated concepts of sin and forgiveness or whatever. You're only understanding the basic elements of maybe the doctrine. But actually, I think I got that wrong, because he goes on, he says, what he means when he's talking about milk versus meat, baby Christians, is actually this: when you are jealous of one another and divide up into quarrelling groups, doesn't that prove you are still babies, wanting your own way? In fact, you're acting like people who don't belong to the Lord at all. And that pulls out a lot more than I know the King James does, but then it goes on to talk about them sort of being in groups under different leaders. One says, I'm of Paul, the other says, I'm with Apollos. Are you not carnal in that sort of thought? Falling in behind different men or leaders in the fellowship and kind of banding up with them and maybe the obvious implication that you don't like the other group in that little church. And he says, again, a sort of a concept I'd always ascribed to the idea of witnessing to someone. He says, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God give the increase. And I'd often thought about that as, someone might say a word here, someone else says a little sort of word to someone there, but ultimately it's God who does the saving. But again, actually in context, he's talking about don't look at what different people have done in the fellowship and kind of get in behind them, especially if it's causing divisions and fighting. I run this place. God is saying, I run this church. And obviously nothing has changed. And so when we remember that, I think it helps us sort of strip away or let the kind of the divisions that might come in amongst us from time to time sort of just dissolve away, because we remember that actually the people here in this group are nothing. We are nothing. We're gone. Like, we're here one day and gone the next. God is in charge. God is running the show. I think for time I'll just leave that there as well. I might finish in maybe Matthew chapter 6. You heard people talk about the unforgivable sin? Who thinks they know what the unforgivable sin is, or if there is an unforgivable sin? Yeah? A few people? Often people will say, oh, it's blasphemy. Blasphemy is the unforgivable sin. And I listening to someone talk about this a while ago, and like, you can see why that is the obvious thing, but actually I think, for reasons I don't have the time to sort of articulate now, that is actually not an unforgivable sin. But there is one that seems pretty unforgivable, actually. Matthew chapter 6, and it's what we've been talking about tonight. Matthew 6 and verse 14. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. That's good, that's easy, that sits with us well. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. There's kind of no way around it, and it's a bit of a sobering thought. And you can't, there's other verses that talk about judging not, because if you do, you'll be judged. God will turn that lens back on you. And so whether you are inspired by the fact that God forgave you, and so you want to give that same kind of, I guess, respect, love, forgiveness to other people, if that motivates you to just let things go and have an attitude in your life of just easy to forgive, water off a duck's back, great, let that motivate you. If that doesn't, maybe that one does in another way, a more stern kind of way. Ultimately, if you can't see a way to let it go, to let something that someone's done in your view wrong to you, if you can't let it go, God will not forgive you. He has a penalty, if you like, for us choosing to hang on to that attitude. But anyway, that sort of risks ending on a bit of a downer, I think, a bit heavy. But it is a sobering point, and something that, like, you know, for as fundamental as a concept as being part of like our Christian walk, it's sometimes good to refresh ourselves on it. Amen.